Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever is here. And the priest answered David, I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have kept themselves from women. And David answered the priest, Truly women have been kept from us, as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy even when it is an ordinary journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy? So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord, to be replaced by hot bread on the day it is taken away. So when Jesus is asked about his disciples, they're just walking through a grain field, and as they walk by, they grab a grain, peel it off, and they're eating it, and they're being accused by the Pharisees of doing something unlawful. A couple of things jump out at me at this story about Jesus' reaction to what they say to him. First is, he doesn't defend his disciples. He doesn't say, hey, wait a second, what they're doing is okay. He references what David did and doesn't say what David did was okay. He just throws it out there for their consideration. Any thoughts? Well, yeah, Bob?
Say that there was nothing wrong with their actions in picking the grain based on the provisions of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 27:25 says, if you enter your neighbor's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not go sickly with the smith. And that's what the Pharisees were watching, thinking that they were doing work on the Sabbath. And they were watching closely where Jesus comes back and he asks them a question.
Right. So plucking a grain of wheat technically wasn't work, but they were trying to be really technical about how they have taken what God said and just blown it out to all these minute rules that they needed to follow. What else do we see here? Dan? So it's interesting. That's why I brought up some of the references in the Old Testament about God saying, "You shall keep my Sabbath, for I am the Lord your God. You'll, to remember me." And then Jesus implies that he's the Lord of the Sabbath. So if you connect the two together, Jesus is telling them, "I'm God." Exactly. What else do we see here? Right, exactly. And Did anybody's mind go to the Matthew account? Because in there, Jesus says a lot more. There's more to be said about this. And I was joking with Gary about this, that, if we were driving to the church building on a Sunday morning and we were behind the oars in their van, we see their van skid off the road and hit a tree, the proper thing to do isn't go, oh, sorry, we got to get to church, and just keep going. And that's the point Jesus makes about, hey, if your animal were stuck in a ditch, surely you'd pull them out. That it's getting the priorities straight of what is the Sabbath all about. And this is, it's not, like you said, it's not this rule keeping, as Dan was saying, a checklist thing. Dan? What else? Any other thoughts? So I think it's interesting in verse 25 when he says, have you never read that what David did when he was in need and hungry? And I think the implication there is his disciples were in need and hungry. This is what they did when they were in need and hungry, that you don't, the God instituting the Sabbath wasn't some sort of a punishment or a penance for the people. It was to give them rest and to think about God and to keep it holy in his name, and not to punish them that, hey, if you're hungry, don't you dare grab a bite to eat, that's work. That was totally not the intention of the Sabbath. Any other thoughts? My mind veered a couple different directions with this also, that multiple times Jesus in the Matthew account says, if you had known what I meant when I said I desire mercy instead of sacrifice, that love is what is important, and caring for man's needs wasn't something God didn't just like shove that aside and say, no, you must worship me. It's like common sense that if you're hungry, it's okay to grab a bite to eat on the Sabbath. Any other thoughts here? So who was supposed to eat the bread when David went to the priest? Was it okay for anybody to eat that bread? Why was it unlawful? Who was supposed to eat the bread? The bread was intended for the priests, right? So how do we get around the fact when Jesus says it was not lawful, as Tim said, it was not lawful for any but the priest to eat? How does that get reconciled? And we get more of that in the Matthew account, where he's saying, how is it that you're okay with David doing this? Right? Exactly. Any other thoughts about that? right? So,
The question whether there's an exception to the rule. The question becomes then, well, how often is the exception? When do you make the determination that this is an exception?
so what's the answer? So, So God wants us to obey him, but he doesn't want us to obey him because he set out these rules. He wants us to obey him because we love him. Oh, somebody over here, Gary, were you going to say? Right. As Gary and Jaron were both saying, that it's not about the rules, it's about the principles that God's laying out. So here's another layer to this. At this point in 1 Samuel 21, who was David? Was he just some guy at this point? He wasn't king yet, but because Saul was technically still king, but what was he? He was the anointed one. He had been anointed already by God. So that's an interesting twist to things, that Jesus is God's anointed one, referring back to David being the anointed one, and the parallel is very interesting, that David's on the run. He's being persecuted, so to speak. Interesting parallels. But I'll just leave it at that. Any other thoughts? So as a side story, what happened to the priest that helped David? Do you remember? Yep. Saul killed him. And he killed all the priests there, all the ones of his father, that guy's father's house, except for who? Who got away? His son that Jesus referred to. Abiathar, or however you pronounce his name. He got away and survived. A lot of layers to this story. Any other thoughts on chapter 2? That was my goal. So, and that was my point about the joke I was making with Gary on Sunday, that, if you're not just going to drive by your brother in Christ that's in a car accident because you have to get to church. I know that's totally not God's intent. And I think a situation where you're on your way to worship God and something comes up where you need to show God's love to somebody is totally different than if I were to schedule myself to be a volunteer at a soup kitchen on a Sunday morning, because I've gone and planned, even though I'm helping somebody and showing love, I've gone and planned to not worship with our brothers and sisters, which, like you said, we need to be very careful about the choices we make. Gary? Right, and we know that David was a man after God's heart. It's fascinating. The whole David story is fascinating to me. Bob, will get you in just a second. He lied to the priest. He made up this story about being on a mission from Saul. There's a lot of things in there that confuse me. Bob?
That example of David and his disciples, one of the reference verses that I got was Isaiah 58, 6 and 7, where it says, "Is not this the kind of fast that I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, and set the oppressed free and break every yoke?" Verse 7 is what I want to point out. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and give the poor wanderer a shelter, when you see the naked, clothe him, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Jesus reiterates that in the continuity of that in the New Testament, looking after others. Now it might have been intolerable rules and restrictions that the Pharisees put in place, but Jesus went a step further. He says it's not just about the rules; it's about caring about your brother.
So as we flip the page to chapter 3, we're going to continue on with some Sabbath discussion. And we've been posing questions to each other, and here we're going to see Jesus doing the same thing. He's going to pose some questions about this topic. Picking up in the beginning of chapter 3, again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So we're getting to I think what Gary was talking about. Jesus is saying, this is a matter of your heart. And he poses the question to them. Well, first of all, he knows their heart. And what is their heart at this point? They're wanting to, that's hardened, as Bonnie says. They're trying to find something to accuse him of. So right off the bat, we see that his immediate audience here has hardened hearts, and they've got a problem. So he poses the question to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to save a life? I mean, why were they silent when he poses this question?
They couldn't argue. Jesus knew their hearts, and that's why he says, stand up in front of everyone so they can see this argument that goes and prove that I am the Lord. And they couldn't come back with a good one.
Yep. Bob says they had no response. They couldn't come back, and that's what made them angry. What else do we see going on here? And he performs a miracle right before their eyes. And what is their response? We got to kill this guy. We got to get rid of him. Any thoughts about that? Any thoughts about sitting with a guy who's claiming to be God, and he poses a question about the Sabbath, or whether or not it's lawful to heal somebody on the Sabbath, and he says, stretch out your hand to a man with a withered hand, and the man's hand stretches out and he's healed right before their eyes. And the reaction isn't, wow, he might actually be who he says he is. The reaction is, we got to figure out how to get rid of this guy. Thoughts about that? So what is, in these two paragraphs we looked at, the end of chapter 2, beginning of chapter 3, is Jesus trying to give a lesson to these people about the Sabbath, or what is his point?
Well, he can read people's hearts. We probably all know messages coming from the people who are around. He knew what their intent was.
So in the Old Testament, what was God's repeated statement that he made to the Jews? He said, that you will know, or that the surrounding nations will know, that I am the Lord your God. And Jesus is God in the flesh, and he's trying to get these people to understand, I am the Lord your God. And some people get it, some people don't. And here we're seeing people that don't. They don't even want to consider him being who he says he is. So with a Sabbath day, it being about rest, who gives us rest? God does, right? Jesus even said, take my yoke, my burden is light, I will give you rest. Jesus is the Sabbath, so to speak. He is the rest. And this is all ironic. So, pulling back a little bit to what Adam had talked about for the first few weeks of this class, Mark is writing to a primarily Roman audience, not necessarily a Jewish audience. And so, Mark is not trying to give a lesson to Gentiles on what the Sabbath is and what the Sabbath is all about. What is Mark's message in this portion of his gospel? all about who Jesus is. He's explaining to his audience who Jesus is. And he is God. He is the same God who instituted the Sabbath. Any other thoughts? Ready to keep going? So, picking up in verse 7, Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed him from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan and from around Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him. For he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. And whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he strictly ordered them not to make him known. So, you've got quite a contrast here between the Pharisees and these other crowds. The Pharisees are seeking to destroy him, and these crowds are seeking to come see him. Why are these crowds coming to see him? To be healed. They have heard about all these things he's done. That's what it says. They heard what he had done, and they're coming to get something from him. They're coming to get healed. So they're not coming because they believe he's the Son of God, and they're not coming because they think, this is God in our presence. They're coming, it appears to me, and you can disagree with me, this is what class is all about, we have a discussion, that they're coming because they want something from him. Not necessarily coming for the right reason. So when the unclean spirits see Jesus, what do they say to him? In verse 11, "You are the Son of God." The Pharisees don't see it. It's right in front of their face. They don't see it. The unclean spirits know it. They know exactly who he is. Thoughts about that? All about their hearts. They didn't want to see it. And it is no different today. Today you take the entire Bible or the Gospel of Mark and you present it to two different people, you're going to get two totally different reactions. You could get somebody who is open to learning about God and finding out who he is, or you could get somebody with a totally hardened heart that doesn't want to even think about it or consider it. Nothing has changed in 2,000 years. People are still going to have one of the two reactions. But the main question is, who is Jesus and what are you going to do with the information? What else? So this is the first mention of Jerusalem, I believe. To this point. So you've got people actually coming from Jerusalem out to where Jesus is. So word about what's going on and his, for lack of a better term, rock star status is growing. We're up in that northern region around the Sea of Galilee, but down south, Jerusalem, they've heard about it now too, and they're coming up to see what's going on. They're coming up to get healed because they've got need. But people are talking about Jesus. The word is spreading. Any other thoughts? What's that?
What is grace?
You tell me, what is grace?
Well, I think if I'm living my life and I'm doing the best that I can, and somewhere between Matthew and Revelation, I misinterpret something or do something a little bit different than maybe what someone else would do, I hope for the grace of God will save me.
Right. I don't think any of us believe we have a God that is an ogre that is standing over us, waiting for us to mess up so we can go, aha, gotcha. That is not the God we are serving. Right. Any other thoughts? All right, so picking up in verse 13, he went up on a mountain and called to him those who he desired, and they came to him, and he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach, and have authority to cast out demons. And he appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, Andrew, and Philip, and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Then he went home, and the crowd gathered again so that he could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, he is out of his mind. All right. So, why did Jesus select apostles? And why 12?
The job he had to do was too big to do himself.
Okay.
No, I don't know. Well,
Okay, so in verse 14, he gives us the purpose here, that he wants these people that are going to be people who are going to be with him through his ministry, and he's going to send them out to preach, and he's going to give them authority. And in this case, he says authority to cast out demons. 12, whether it's 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles, you can make some assumptions that maybe this is the new Israel or whatever it might be. But he is choosing these men because they are going to be a witness to everything he's doing. They are going to learn from him, and then they're going to do his work. He's going to give them work to do. Any thoughts about the apostles? And then any thoughts about Jesus' family? So you've got unclean spirits saying, you are the Son of God. And you got Pharisees saying, we got to get rid of this guy. He's a blasphemer. Got to get rid of him. And then you've got Jesus' family who say what? He's nuts. I will tell you right now that if I started saying I was God, my brothers would think I was nuts. Jesus' own family thought he had lost his mind. What do we know about some of Jesus' family? Where do they stand later in the New Testament? They understand who he is. They come to understand who he is and believe in him, right? Any other thoughts about the apostles? Or Jesus' family, either one? Okay. I can ask this question because I know the first bell's already rung. What about Jesus knowing that Judas was going to betray him when he picked him as an apostle? Have you thought about that? Did he know? And if he did know, what's up with that? Okay? It is interesting. It is very interesting to me that Jesus will later give Judas the power to cast out demons and to heal people, knowing that he is the one who's going to betray him. Fascinating. Man, we're out of time. So it's my understanding we are not having normal classes on Sunday morning. Is that correct? Can anybody confirm that? Eddie, are we having classes on Sunday morning? Eddie doesn't know. I don't believe we are, so if we're not, we will pick up this discussion next Wednesday night. Thank you.